Robert Milazzo of New York Life. I hope I got that right.
I have. How you doing?
I'm doing very well on a rainy afternoon in England. I'm not sure what it's like in New York. It's always hot and steamy at this time in New York. I'm coming out in 2 weeks, and August is not my favorite time to visit New York.
Well, it's definitely been extremely hot here, especially the last couple of days. So yeah,
Well, let's hope it cools down by the time.
Appropriate clothes.
Yeah. Well, last time we saw each other, we were in Singapore, and that was hot and steamy as well. So hey, I should be used to it. So look, Robert, I'm so pleased that you're on the show that is David Anderson Talking Market Data. We talked about a few topics we're going to talk about, but I think just to kick us off, as I say to everybody, I will put your LinkedIn profile in the description of all the podcast elements, whether it's on YouTube or Spotify or Apple, etc. It will have your LinkedIn profile so people can see your illustrious career. And I will also put the New York Life URL so if people are not familiar with your company, they can familiarize themselves with that. But even though I'm going to do that, it would still be good. Robert, can you just give a brief description of your market data career and sort of where you came from in that, what you'd be doing in that, and how you ended up where you are?
Sure. Yeah. And without diving into too much detail, look, I've been in the market data industry for over 20 years at this point, working at prestigious firms such as Goldman, large tier one investment banks, Citi, large hedge funds like AQR, and now a mutual insurance company, New York Life. So I've kind of had a very diverse range of organizations that I've worked for. And I've even had the opportunity to work across the globe. So I started off managing a New York market data team for Citibank, was given the opportunity to go and build out their Asia Pacific team based out of Hong Kong, where I managed teams from across the region in all of the Asia hubs. Eventually working in the Philippines, managing an offshore team supporting global market data operations functions, and eventually found myself back in New York. But, definitely a lot of cultural experience to kind of see how the world works in other places, because that's an important part of now running a global market data team here at New York Life, right? Being able to help navigate those cultural barriers or as well as the market data industry challenges that we face.
And I mean, it's interesting because your Goldman's, your Citi group experience, I would categorize as sell side, big investment bank, sell side institutions. Then you said AQR, hedge fund, again, a very different breed of activity. And now a mutual insurance company, I think is the way you described it. So classic buy side. I use the phrase long only buy side to differentiate that from hedge funds is one way of describing it. But here, actually, we're going to talk about market data organizationally, but just to clarify about New York Life, one of the things I only discovered in the last few years was the buy side. Yeah, obviously hedge funds are one flavor, and then you've got the traditional buy side. But I've split that into two parts in my head. One is asset owners, who are traditional pension funds, life insurance companies, who are collecting money from the public, and have enormous funds that they are investing on behalf of their audience. And then you have another group that are investment managers or asset managers. Now, sometimes the same company can have both in it. I mean, I'm conscious because I'm on this side of the pond, something like Legal & General. You've got Legal & General Group, and then you've got Legal & General Investment Management. So Legal & General Group is the insurance company, but they've also got a specialist investment group. Now, how does that play at your end? What is New York Life specifically, or the bit you work for?
Sure. So New York Life has both, right? We have what we call our general account, where we manage New York Life assets.
So you're an asset owner in that context.
As an asset owner, right? And that's been around for a very long time at New York Life. But then they expanded into the asset management area. So they formed the Nylum organization, a mainstay being their premier funds, right? But then how we distinguish ourselves from probably some other asset managers is we have an affiliated boutique structure. So we started targeting well-known investment boutiques that can help diversify our investment strategies. So we started buying up different boutiques such as Candriam, Mackay Shields, Ausbil. They're all wholly owned affiliates. If you go to their websites, it'll say Candriam, a Nylum company, Mackay Shields, a Nylum company. So these help sort of, better round out our investment strategies. And then we have a lot of collaborated portfolios where there'll be a a portfolio that is developed in collaboration between Nylum and Mackay to leverage both of our strengths to sort of best perform for our client base.
And from a market data perspective, are you employed by NYLIM, New York Life Investment Management, as distinct from the insurance company, the asset owner? Are you in within the investment management part of the
I,
company?
I do sit within officially. I sit within the mutual fund business on the NILIM side. So I am actually very much part of the business, and but I do run a global function. So I collaborate with procurement quite closely, who is more of a global shared service function to manage our
Of the
market data
whole
related.
group. So the
Yes.
yeah, okay. In
So,
fact,
so our procurement team will like be the front runner on most of our market data deals, and they deal with like a large percentage of the easy renewals and contracts that kind of where we have vendors that are very reasonable in their approach to CPI level increases, and then where I get involved is they will leverage my SME knowledge, so my subject matter expertise, to help navigate all of the complex renewals, so the large enterprise relationships which require a lot of collaborations across our affiliated boutiques, or anything where it passes a certain threshold of increase. So I can really take a closer look to see if it's in line with industry benchmarks and other sort of.
I've talked with my friends, which I count you as one now, in the user firm side of things, and it's this organizational structure. So you mentioned procurement. So you've got a procurement department, a group of people who are that is their whole focus, and they do some of the interaction with the market data vendors and the different providers. But then you're the subject matter expert. So you, as a subject matter expert, you and your team, where do you sit organizationally? Are you under procurement? Do you report into a procurement group, or you report to the business, quote unquote, or are you in IT, or is there some? I mean, what is the person or that you report to, and the person that the person you report to reports to? Where do they sit in the overall organization?
Sure. So this is one of the interesting things about market data is that, every organization you go to will have figured out a different way of doing it. And actually the funny reference point I always give when this topic comes up with my peers is when I worked at Citibank, right? Which is a huge organization. Um, we got passed around quite a bit depending on focus. So when managing costs was a big focus, we sat within finance. When technology and tools that we use in delivery, we sat in like O&T, operations and technology. And I think when I left, we were kind of part of supply chain management. So in like the procurement world. So we did get tossed around quite a bit.
I've heard that story from
uh,
many people.
and at AQR, which is a very, tech focused organization, we sat within technology under the CTO. Okay. Kind of within the project management space. Um, so, here at New York Life, it's kind of what I described where we sit within the business, not
Right.
within procurement. Although a lot of people I talk to, because I'm engaging them on renewals or new purchases, they do have that misconception that we are part of procurement. And I actually appreciate being part of the business, So I used to report directly into the COO of the Nylon business, the head of the sales and distribution team. He also had like that dual hat role. But now we've kind of formed a new team, which is like a data and technology team. So it's a
Right.
combination of market data, the team that handles client data for like marketing materials and client reports, AI. So all of the data has been brought together under one umbrella. And then we all report into the COO
I mean,
of.
I'm not sure you can answer this question, but I'll ask it anyway. I mean, does it matter where you report into? I mean, you've had several lives where you've had different report. I mean, is one better than another, or do you just learn to live with and work with whatever cards you're dealt? I mean, is it simple as that?
Um, you know, I'm sure there's strategic advantages to wherever you sit, right? So the advantage of sitting within the business is you have much more interaction with your peers. They feel like you're on their side, not just kind of driving corporate red tape,
Yeah.
making more things more difficult for them. You're an advocate to kind of help make things easier on the business and get the best outcome for the business. Um, I'm sure though, when you're within a function like procurement, would be easier is usually procurement has more weight behind it when it comes to pushing down certain mandates. Whereas I feel I'm providing this global function from one business, but I support other businesses that are outside. And I have to earn goodwill to kind of get everybody to play ball in certain
So you're a
scenarios.
politician. You're a
Yes.
politician. Yeah, you have to be. A bit of but that's big organizations for you. I there's a couple of topics that a couple of routes we're going to go down. I'm on the organizational one. One thing I definitely want to talk to you a little bit about is the whole idea of offshoring to places like Manila. But hold that thought. We'll come back to that. Don't let me forget that, because I really do want to talk about that as part of the organizational structure of marquee data teams. But focusing on the role, you as a subject matter expert, you dealing with the more complicated, complex um, in relationships with providers, vendors, whatever. I want to sort of delve into that, and I've got a sub context as well. How is all of this different in a buy side firm to a sell side firm? Is it different, or is it really? I mean, is it the same job? Do you find there's a difference? I mean, let me sort of tee up where I'm going with that. I mean, one of the key things that I've noticed with buy side firms, with my contacts on the market data side of buy side firms, that two of many elements they're agitated by are how they interact with the index providers and the licensing and the payment for index licensing. And the other one is how they pay for the license to do with credit ratings. Those two things seem to be uh, very, very angst ridden from a buy side person's. And it was one of the reasons I asked the question about asset owners versus asset managers, because with both of those index providers and credit rating agencies, aren't you negotiating with both hands tied behind your back and a sticky plaster over your? I'm being dramatic, but it's like the asset owners give you a mandate, say you need to have a fund that is the S&P 500 or the MSCI something or whatever. They give you a mandate describing it, which locks you in to having to buy the licensing for that index, and then the credit rating aren't there on the rules that say you must have at least two credit rate. I've struggled to understand. I feel sorry for you in a sense, not in a pitying way, but in a friendly way. Your hands are tied, are they not?
Yeah, so I think to your first point about differences between buy side and sell side, so maybe it'll be helpful to preface that the early part of my career, the first 15 years of my career, I was on mostly the marketing operations side, right? which meant that I was dealing with invoicing, managing inventory, doing all the reporting for our businesses, helping, provide transparency for contract renewals to whoever was actually leading the negotiation. So very different from being on the front lines, actually engaging with the vendors firsthand and seeing uh, you know, the tactics that the vendors used. But of course, we saw the bad downstream effect, which was the cost increases, which we had to implement into the inventory and stay on top of their fuzzy commercial allocation logic that was provided. But the reason I mention this is because I definitely now, since I move into the buy side at AQR, is when I'm transitioned from purely operations to being a man of many hats, managing both operations as well as that frontline work, the business analyst work, I think where it's commonly known, where you're evaluating the business needs, engaging with the vendors, and sort of seeing those trends more upfront. So I don't have too much of a comparison on the buy side versus sell side, from that regard. To get to your second point, yes, we do here, and I'm very from a lot of my peers that I speak to, do have our hands tied in a lot of ways, and the credit agencies, they do take advantage of that because they know that you need two or all three. Some clients will mandate you have all three. Some will mandate two, and so we have to abide by that. So they know there's very little that we can do. And I had one of those credit agencies that go so far as saying, well, we have the lowest coverage and we know that we're rated number 3, but we're the most expensive because, that's the way it is. And they have no shame in openly admitting that. And
Well,
they
and
say,
and
well,
I
what
want
are
to
you going
be,
to
I want to
do?
be, I want to be fair to them a little bit. I know it sounds a bit bad saying that to you, to your face, but if you were them, you would do that. It's like there's a situation where they're handed this opportunity, and they're also being told by their lords and masters to maximize profits, and therefore it's almost like they just have to do it. It's I don't know. Well, again, I mean, well, somebody. I think it was a gentleman who works, Rudolf Siebel, I think, I was quoted previously to me about this, saying resistance is not futile. Quoting Star Trek and the Borg, because it does occasionally. I feel like if I was in your shoes, do you just give up and go home? I mean, you don't, I know, but it must feel like that sometimes.
No, I think resistance is not futile. And I think that's why organizations like FISD are great because they help gather the voice of the industry. And I know there's limited amounts of things they can do, right? Due to, we try not to collude on and share specifics. But, things like gathering common feedback about something that is really does not feel fair and then writing letters or speaking to those vendors, right? And I know that may fall on deaf ears, but I think if we didn't complain or if we didn't push back, things would be a lot worse. I wish there was more we can do. I wish that there was some government governing body that sat on top of these market data vendors and, for almost kind of like an antitrust thing where, these vendors, they get very big, they purchase their competitors, and they feel that they can charge you whatever they want to charge you just because what are you going to do? We're either the only person in this space or we know the barriers to move or change providers are extremely, extremely high, right? Either the cost or the amount of effort and time, is a huge investment, and most firms will just pay the extra amount to avoid jumping through all those hoops.
And I mean, so credit ratings, you've got this situation where you're often mandated to have 2 or 3, as you just mentioned. With index providers, it's a question of whether your fund managers, the person who creates a fund, has linked it with a particular benchmark index. And once they've done that, and once that has been advertised to the general public, then while that fund exists, you have to buy the index licensing. Because I mean, again, I've never sat in a procurement role, but my simplistic understanding, I've always been a salesperson on the other side of the equation. But at the end of the day, the customer's ultimate weapon is to say no, to say, well, thanks a lot, David, but no thanks, and to walk away. But if you can't do that, how do you negotiate?
I think many have tried to, move to lower cost alternative indexes, right? And there is some capability to speak to your clients and see if they're willing to, change the benchmark, but that is not always the best optics to your clients, right? To
Yeah.
save a few bucks, you want to, convince them to use what's maybe not an industry, best or an industry standard.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
because the S&P 500 or the MSCI, they've spent a lot of time. They've created a public brand that people trust, and you've got to give them credit for that. I mean, that took time to build to that.
And then the common feedback you'll get is, when one of these lower cost alternatives becomes very popular or someone moves over to that from a bigger shop, they bring their ideas and those become less cost advantageous as well. So you do all this work. And then, 5, 10 years later, you're back to where you were from a cost perspective because, so it seems like just an endless vicious cycle. Um, regarding other leverage, right? I think, one of the other common issues is you could need one index within an index family. The way the indexes work, they license by family. And sometimes you need a lot of those indices. But there are many situations where you just need one of an index within a family and they don't do a la carte pricing.
Right.
Now, you can certainly use that as leverage within your negotiation, but more and more of these indices are trying to move to what they say standard industry pricing. But unlike exchanges, they don't post any of that standard industry pricing on the website. So there is a little bit of room there to negotiate, but these are quite costly packages, when you buy a family, and to pay all of that for one benchmark, can be a little bit painful at first, right? From a budget perspective.
Well, that makes me think of another genre in our industry, which is benchmarking. Not index benchmarking, but market data price benchmarking. Companies like Expand or Substantive Research have got into this game recently. And I know both of those entities are initially focused on sell-side firms more than the buy-side. But are you seeing any of their offerings? What is your view? Because as I understand, the simplistic thing is it enables you to check whether you're somehow paying more or even less than your peers. I mean, that's the raison d'etre of those services. I mean, any experience of or thoughts on those types of service?
So I see there's two camps when it comes to cost benchmarking.
Yeah.
One camp
You've got a
says,
smile on your face. You've got a smile.
well, because I think one camp is that basically benchmarks are too abstract and not helpful at all, right? And then the other camp is, which the one I'm sitting on, is that I think they are helpful. They may not directly allow you to save money per se, right? You can't just come say, well, the benchmark cost is X, you're charging me Y. Now you're going to charge me X, right? So, a lower benchmark or higher benchmark does not exactly equate to changing cost. But from a transparency perspective, and I'm a huge fan of transparency. I've been striving my entire life in market data to improve the quality of my inventory, to provide the best possible transparency to my businesses so that they can understand their spend. And now this is just more metadata about their inventory. So you're currently paying this, and this is how you benchmark against your peers. So we've actually dived headfirst into benchmarking this year. We do have a relationship with Substantive. They're much newer in the industry compared to Expand, but they've been extremely helpful. And they do take a slightly different approach than Expand. I think Expand, who've been around for a while, servicing tier one investment banks, because that's, I think, how they initially formed through partnership with a couple of tier one investment banks. They focus on more high level benchmarking. Whereas Substantive is more, they have developed this software where they can help you have a dynamic benchmarking methodology where you're not just benchmarked against your peer based on the size and shape of your organization. You're benchmarked against your peer based on the commercials of a particular contract. So it'll look at the number of regions, it'll look at the number of modules, it'll look at the number of users that you have tiered, and it'll look for the peers that fall within those same commercial footprint. This way, you're really kind of comparing apples to apples, right?
Which is always that's always the
So
quest.
So again, I'm not at this point. We haven't been able to say, well, again, X is X, and that's what I'm going to save, right? But I think our businesses have been pleased that we have integrated some dashboards into the renewal process, showing here are your spend trends. Here is how you compare against your peers. Here's our proposed strategy to negotiate this contract down, or to, maybe generate some cost avoidance because there's an extremely high renewal proposal, and it would.
Well, actually, I'm guessing, and tell me if I'm picking this up right, because funny enough, I had Mike Carradus on one of my podcasts recently. I had Expand on it. It was Kevin Morgan from Expand on the podcast. But from what I'm picking up from you, I'm imagining that if you get this benchmarking and you see one particular scenario where the tool, the benchmarking, seems to be saying that you might be paying over the odds, then you've got another one that's telling you you're about on track, and maybe another one where you're doing better than the odds. I presume what that enables you to do is say, look, that with the one where we're paying over the odds, let's focus our attention. Let's put some more time and effort into thinking about that. You're right. You can't go in and tell that vendor that the benchmark says they should be charging you 10% less, but you know that, and therefore you're going to do everything you can. You're going to apply a lot of effort because logic would suggest that you might be able to get that one down. Whereas, is that the logic? It's almost
I think it's correct, right? It's being able to focus as well as being able to communicate to senior leaders, because when we're below the benchmark, we're paying less than the benchmark, and a vendor is pushing, 20% increase, and we get that 20% down to 8. 8 is not a great number. Management is not going to say, "Oh, congratulations on achieving an 8% increase this year," right?
But you want 12%
8% every year for the next 3 years for a 3-year deal. That may seem like a loss, but when they were pushing 20% a year for 3 years, you do shave off 12 of that, and you can show that while it's not a great final income, there was a lot of cost avoidance going from 20 to 8, and we are still below the benchmark. So it helps create the narrative for management to better understand where you are and why you're there and why you were only able to achieve what you achieved.
And that's a segue into another part of the discussion, which might take us to Manila as well. But it's obviously you're trying to cut costs of the data that you spend with different vendors. That's your job. But then you yourselves are a cost. The market data team is a cost. And what I've sort of noticed over the last few years, it's often an area that gets cut. And there are less people in market data teams than maybe there once were or whatever. And I get the sense that they're even busier. They're really busy. And just going back to that point about priorities, I'm guessing you don't have time to do everything. There's sort of a priority list. There are some things you could spend some time on and it might get you some gains, but literally that's 15th on the list and you've got to do the other 14 first. I mean, where am I going with this? I mean, it was something that Mike Carradus said when I asked him, well, what would be really good for a market data team if they could have one more person. So if you magically could wave that magic wand and have one or two more people, would those one or two more people pay for themselves?
It really depends on the scenario, but maybe to break that down a little bit. So look, I've been for the last 15 years, one of my key focuses has been building teams from the ground up for market data. When I worked for Citi, started off managing their U.S. team, but they sent me to Hong Kong to build an Asia specific team. They had people in certain locations like Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia, Tokyo, kind of supporting their countries in some way or fashion, but they weren't like managing the full scope of market data. So, my goal there was to create a centralized market data team. So grabbing those resources that they already had in place, bringing them together into a centralized team, and then establishing some standardized processes, of course, with some unique things that need to take place from a regulatory perspective for each country. And what we did is we took about 15 resources spread across 5 countries, and turned it into a centralized market data team supporting 18 Asia countries for all aspects of market data. So we were able to take existing resources and do more just by having, more standardized processes, better technology under my tutelage to sort of kind of how to drive, best in class market data processes. So, you know, utilizing what you got better
Yeah.
is the first way to avoid spending money. It doesn't always throwing bodies at things doesn't always
Right.
mean better outcome. It's making sure that you have the best operational processes in place. You have, the stakeholder support needed to drive certain strategic initiatives, to get the most progress. Because if not, if you don't have support from the top, sometimes you could just spin your wheels like trying to work from the bottom up. And so, you know,
How,
you need the best bottoms up and top down approach synergy between those two to sort of find the best outcomes.
and I mean, again, not just focusing on your company, but your experience generally when you talk to peers of yours, friends of yours. How do you think the top, when I say the top, the C level, the COOs, the more senior people who aren't market data people, but ultimately who market data somehow report into in some way, how do you think they view market data? I've had a few conversations about it. It's the sort of relative seniority, the relative importance, the relevant power dynamic, if you will, of market data teams. I sometimes feel that, market data teams, oh, yeah, well done, you saved 10% last year. Right, save us another 10%. If you can do 10%, maybe do 11% this year. I mean, is it a thankless task sometimes?
I think it really, again, it also depends on which area you report into, right? Um, so I think, not to mention names of like,
No, it's
every organization that I've
generalities.
worked
Yeah.
for, but if I look back on the past, right? Um, one of my prior roles, market data was a thankless job because before we got there, everybody had a magic credit card that they could just buy whatever they want. There was no control, no transparency. And so, I went in to build the idea of a market data function within that organization. And, it was pretty much a thankless job at first because I was adding red tape. I was
Yeah.
establishing new protocols that people had to
You were
follow
getting in the
to
way. Yeah.
purchase things. I was asking questions around why they were spending a certain amount of money or using similar tools to see if we can find, one standardized product that could be used across multiple teams. And so, people were forced to kind of evaluate what they were doing, think about what was essential and non-essential, and get rid of some of the non-essential services. So, making changes, ruffling a few feathers.
Yeah.
But I think in the long term, after a couple of years of getting through those initial pains, um, when we got into a couple rough economic years, the what we had established, the framework we had established, the processes we had established, the relationships we had established, all became more valuable because there were mandates to drive down costs, and those costs were going to affect their P&L. Cost cuts were going to affect their P&L in a positive way that would then help affect their bonuses and
So they could feel it. They could actually, yeah.
so
I mean,
and,
so in
sorry,
a
go ahead.
sense, you must have then you did a good job, and then that communicated itself to that senior role. So I mean, I suppose there's a degree of I called you a politician earlier on, but I mean, there's a politics upwards. You have to I've heard this many times from friends of mine on the customer side of the equation. You've got to get senior management buy-in because probably the people you are trying to remove services from. I mean, the classic example is get a Bloomberg terminal away from somebody who doesn't really use it, but they might be a really senior person in the organization with a lot of status.
Yeah.
And unless you've got somebody with even more status above them backing you up, that must be an uncomfortable conversation.
I think it's finding a good harmony between bottoms up and top down, as I mentioned earlier, right? You obviously need senior management support, but you don't want to always use them as a sledgehammer to get people to do what you want to do. So you want to work from the bottom up to kind of convince people, right, that it's the right thing to do, and what the benefits are, kind of in work and operate in good faith, and and develop that rapport with them so that they buy into things instead of always being force fed. I find that's usually a better path, is to get people to buy into what you're proposing rather than having pushed down from above. But it's nice to have when you really need to get something done, to bring in that air cover to kind of help push things over the fence, right? So
Let me take another dynamic. Salespeople. I was a salesperson for 14 years before I moved into sort of product marketing at Reuters and into general consultancy. What advice? What is the perfect salesperson? The perfect sales technique? What are bad sales techniques and what are good sales techniques? Because you have to sit and listen and talk to a lot of salespeople. I hope a lot of them are listening in on this. So, what advice? What direction? Suggestions would you give?
to our vendors' sales teams.
Yeah, the people. I mean, what? Yeah, sorry, I brought a smile on your face as well. Cut your prices by 50%. But no, seriously, I mean, they've got a job to do. They've got a job to do.
I think I have a couple things that I could advise them, right? Because I don't know, and again, I've been hearing it for the last couple of years, and maybe they've always said this in some way, shape, or form, but the common theme, right, is, we're investing a lot in our products, so we need to raise our cost. Or you're too far below list, so we need to get you stepped closer to list. And what's wrong with both of those is, the first one on investments in their product is they need to make investments in their products to stay relevant and stay competitive. Okay. And that's considered R&D, right? Research and development, whether it be development of a new product or enhancements of an existing product. R&D is supposed to be recovered over time. And I think what these vendors have this misconception is everything that they spend on R&D, they then have to build in and as part of a recovery in the next year's price increase. And that's unfair, right? Because when operating, and this is what I always tell them, as our operating costs increase as an asset manager, we can't just change the rates to our clients, right? The way we have to battle in growing overhead cost is by growing our business. So we find new clients, or we improve our investment strategies to get a better return, right? So, that's the way we combat overhead. Obviously, we make cost cuts where we can by reducing unnecessary expenses. But we strive to grow our business. And so that's what I say to our vendors. I was like, your R&D needs to be recovered over time, and you should be growing your client base, or and to help offset that R&D. And if you need to charge your new clients more, right, because that's what you feel is the new list than some of your older clients, well, it still seems a little bit unfair that one's paying more than the other, but you should acknowledge and respect long-term relationships, and unreasonable increases just because we've been around longer seems unfair to the loyalty of your customer, right?
And I mean, I think, obviously you're seeing a lot of that, which is why you feel a lot about that. Is that quite a common occurrence?
It is. On almost every single renewal that is above 5%, they claim that it's because of investment in their product. And look, this is all the wonderful things that we've done, right? And so what they don't tell you is, how is that benefiting you? Or worry about, like, they don't say, well, we've spoken to your users at New York Life and said they're finding these items really helpful.
Well, I
right?
mean,
Maybe they are, but they haven't done sort of that
and
client touch point to justify the increase they're pushing, right?
and that there's two levels to this bit of the conversation. And I think what your point is to the senior management in these vendor firms, the people who are deciding that they want to put the prices up by 20% or whatever, and who are telling their salespeople, this is the reason we're doing it, whatever, go out and tell your Robert that. But then I think that the next more micro level one is the actual individual salespeople who've got to come and talk to you about all these products and services and price items. What I was hearing you just saying then is if they could genuinely demonstrate value, increased value, new value, extra value, nobody likes paying more money for it, but that would be easier to swallow. So would it be, in other words, a sandwich of, yeah, you got a price increase, but look at all these extra, being able to articulate and explain how you've got value. Is that what they should be doing, really?
I agree. And like, so if they roll out a new enhancement and, none of us like being nickel and dime, but I'd rather them, if they roll out something new, instead of just right away embedding it within to the core platform, maybe it could be an add-on module, right?
Yeah.
Or they pitch you, do you want this? We can turn it on for you for X price. And so instead of trying to prove the value and sell you something new, what they do is they just keep on embedding more and more into like a core license that you have and expect you to pay increases. I think that goes back to, what I mentioned about list, right?
Yeah.
So you can sign a contract with a vendor, and at the time, you're paying the list or close to list or whatever the list they communicate. But then that list now becomes like a shadow value because they'll be raising your price 5+% each year. But in the background, they're raising their list 10, 20%. And so over the course of 5 years, while you may have started out at list, over time, you're now half of list. Or again, this shadow value that they call list, whether it's real or not. Sometimes, it's debatable whether that's just a tactic used by vendors. And we're like, how did we get here? We started off this relationship paying what you originally asked. There was no mention of significant deep discounts, and we've been paying reasonable increases year over year. So how did we get to a point where now we're well below list? And again, sometimes that falls on deaf ears because they hide behind this layer of we have a pricing committee and we're being told by the pricing committee that the increases need to be X for anything under list. And we really want to help you, right? They try to like, we're your friend, we want to maintain the relationship, but our hands are tied because the pricing committee has deemed this necessary.
And I have some sympathy for that. That is probably the situation. They want to be your friend as the frontline salespeople. That's their job.
Yeah.
But then they've got things going on in the background. But I think, picking up definitely from you and from others, the transparency thing. Again, gosh, the last time I was selling 30 plus years ago, with Reuters, we did have a price list, a published price list. I think Telerate, when I was selling Telerate, had a published price list. So I'm not quite sure why that has changed. I think it is something, I don't know, sinister's too strong a word, but there's, transparency would seem to be a good idea. But there's less of it these days. Let's flick to a subject we've been touching on, the human capital. So we talked about organizational structure of market data, building teams. You described your journey of how you built for another firm. You changed the structure and the approach of a distributed Asian sort of network of offices and what have you. A couple of thoughts I'd throw at you and then ask your views on them. One, I get the sense out there there's arguably a shortage of subject matter experts, of people who really understand market data well, even in London and New York. In London and New York, two big centers, and in other areas. And again, I don't know if it's because of that or just in parallel to that. There are these growing offshore areas. Sometimes they don't like the word offshore, centers of excellence. Sometimes they don't like the word centers of excellence. I recently was in Bangalore where there's a whole load of financial firms, HSBC, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, State Street, whatever. And then I know you've got some experience in Manila. I know there's a few. I mean, Manila, you guys, I think FactSet have got something. I think Macquarie have got something. I mean, there's a few. So what, those two different stories, the somehow the shortage or the shortfall of human capital in the major centers of places like New York and London, and then this shift towards market data teams in Bangalore, Manila, Buenos Aires, which is JP Morgan.
Yep. So I think, there's always pressure to manage costs, right? As operating costs grow in one area, they look to see where we can reduce costs in others. And, market data is a expense to the business, right?
Yeah.
We get charged back to our businesses. And so they ask questions. Well, if we're being asked to reduce cost on the data side, there should be an expectation that you guys are reducing cost on the operations side as well, right? Or within the market data support team. So I think that's always been a pressure, is to keep our costs low, right? There's always great tools we want to buy. And so we have to find a balance between reducing headcount or finding more efficient, cost-effective operating models. And so, I've made it a specialty of mine too, over the last decade, to build in offshore teams. So I talked about how I originally built out a team in Asia for Citibank, but I actually was one of the pioneers in building out market data operations teams in the Philippines. So the Philippines is very well known for BPO organizations, focusing on finance, procurement operations, and accounts payable type functions, right? I was able to, for Citibank, take people from those types of roles, which are very applicable, right? Financial accounting, procurement, paying invoices. These are things that market data operations teams do, and build out a large team for Citibank there, supporting all of their market data operations functions. And I have since then built out two more teams. So for AQR, I had built out a team in the Philippines, and now for New York Life, we have a presence there as well. So I believe there's 6 major financial institutions that I'm aware of: Citibank, New York Life, AQR, Manulife, Macquarie, and ING.
And then also
market data operations presence.
And then you've also got FactSet. I know I've got a big opera, and Thomson Reuters. LSEG Data Analytics have got it was the old Thomson had a
LSEG, also MSCI. It's actually something I'm investigating right now. I'm trying to learn the vendor footprint, because I had the pleasure a couple months ago hosting my own market data conference in the Philippines for the 3 teams that I've built out. So a little bit of a friendly audience though, but to give them the networking experience so that they can kind of, we focused on, what are some operational best practices? What are the tools that we use, and talent development programs for market data professionals. But my plan for 2026 is to sort of grow that across all of the asset managers with a presence there, as well as the vendors. Sorry if I'm plugging, my conference on your podcast, but it's something that's near and dear to my heart. I feel like for the last 15 years, I have been working with the Philippines. I feel close connections to the Philippines because I lived there for a few years. My wife's Filipino. I stay very much in tune with the culture, which is a key aspect of managing teams there. And I feel like I've gotten a lot out of it. It's been one of the proudest moments of my career, is sort of seeing people develop and grow into their roles as market data professionals. And, even though I've moved on to two different roles, I still stay in contact with everybody there and see how they've developed.
Are all these firms in close proximity? Because Manila's an enormous city, isn't it? With terrible traffic, a bit like Bangalore and its terrible traffic. But is Manila big and sprawling? And
so I think the majority of them will be in 2 different areas. You have Makati, which is like the central business district, and then BGC, which is the newer sort of growing central business district. And the funny thing is, if there was absolutely no traffic, you can probably drive between the two in 5 to 10 minutes. But
But
traffic in places like the Philippines and India, you probably have commonly heard, can be a nightmare, particularly during rain or Friday afternoons.
yeah, okay.
And so, it can take time, and there's not
But
a lot of
let me
public transportation. So, it does make getting between those two sites. So they try to centralize things into a specific area so that people can interact. Um,
I think it's good that there are, places like Bangalore, which I've been to, and I've heard a lot about Manila, that you start to build up a whole community. Because I think at the end of the day, you don't want people to leave your company, but if there's a natural flow of people between the different organizations, I mean, that's healthy. That's how an economy works, by sort of people coming and going. But there is one potential downside to this that I've heard about, which is when you're sitting in New York or London and you've offshored, and I hope I'm not being patronizing or condescending here. Frankly, the more junior roles initially out to India or the Philippines or whatever. But then Indian people, Filipino people, being clever people, grow in those roles. And they develop, and they become more experienced, and they become quite valuable in those roles. But they're in Manila or Bangalore. And actually, when you've got vacancies in London or New York because somebody more senior has moved on, you haven't got that little group of people in New York or London that have been developed in a more junior role to pop into the mid-level senior roles because they're in Manila and Bangalore. Just something somebody said to me that
yeah.
it creates a bit of a problem for the future for the people for the mid-level roles in New York and London.
Yeah, I think, look, when I start these teams, I always start where the easiest task, obviously, and then
Yeah,
try to upskill them and grow to the more complicated tasks. Um, I think the sky's the limit, right? I think that the capability is there, the knowledge is there, the English language skills are
yeah,
there, that they can do everything that I can do potentially, right? Well, the thing that they lack is the engagement, right? They're
yeah.
not there, boots on the ground, shaking hands, rubbing elbows with the vendors, with the stakeholders. And so that sets them at a disadvantage. And a lot of times we tend to exclude our operations teams on those calls, one because of time zone differences, or you don't want to distract them from the BAU tasks, right? Because we all have our role to play, and their role is kind of siloed to operational tasks like invoicing, contract renewals. And I try to keep my team as well informed. I meet with them. I have daily stand-up sessions with them to kind of be able to provide whatever support on anything they need. I have a weekly team meeting, and I welcome I have a virtual open door policy that, anytime someone wants to talk about a certain topic or needs help or guidance, I'm here both professionally as well as personally to kind
Yeah.
of engage them on anything that they think that they need help with. But I really think because they're just in another location, they never really get to meet the business. They are put at a disadvantage, and would make it very difficult for one of them to transition from a role there to a role here to sort of replace someone that's moved on.
Well, also, I mean, the cost of living in a London, New York compared, you'd have to pay them vast sums more. I suppose, I mean, you've just identified something because I was almost thinking, well, they could grow in seniority, in Manila, in Bangalore, and I know they have. I know there are much more senior people in those places now who've been there for 10, 15 years, and they're now performing senior functions. So that, in a sense, you know, the quantities of people in London and New York could go down, should go down, and the quantities in Bangalore and Manila go up. But that last point, I don't know how you address that physical distance issue.
So someone has addressed it.
Oh
I
yeah,
actually just recently met with uh, one of the other firms who built the team in Manila. I'm not going to mention the firm's name. Um, but I've been meeting with people to talk about the market data exchange conference
yeah.
that I'm forming. So I've been meeting with the teams that I haven't built. And one of the members of the team in the Philippines is actually moving to the UK to fill a role.
So that
So I don't know if that's because I didn't ask the details, if one of his peers left and he's going to backfill the spot, or if they recognize the talent and they wanted additional boots on the ground. But it's not like it's impossible, right? I think It's all about having the right talent development programs to upskill your staff, having the right internal mobility opportunities where people can apply, and people apply for roles outside of country all the time,
Yeah,
right?
no,
Look, when I left the Philippines 10 years ago, I didn't want to let go of Southeast Asia. I love the culture, I love the location, and I'd have to say for a good majority of the time when I first moved back to New York, I was trying to figure out ways to claw myself back to Asia. I have since then accepted my fate as a fate as a New Yorker.
there are
um,
pros
but
and cons to that. And by the way, actually, I mean, again, sounds like you've got your little conference going quite nicely and you don't need any help. But I mean, when I was in Bangalore a couple of years ago doing my training course, sales plug for my training course, because I train the basics of market data. But then I thought I was there and I did an FISD event in Bangalore and we had 150 people turning up. It was the first event they'd done. And there were loads of, and they flew in from all over India to that. So my good friend and colleague Peter Tierney, I think he was in Asia Pac, based out there. Yeah, maybe you tap on his shoulder and say, "Could you do something with an FISD Manila?" I don't know. Thinking aloud, it's an
yeah, I was
interest.
talking to a lot of them at Asia FIC, a lot of the FISD folks, and they were very supportive. They were like seeing if there's any way that we can leverage contacts or you see how they can provide support and how they plan venues and leverage maybe some of the contacts or processes that they followed in the past, because some of that becomes logistical nightmares too, finding a venue.
I know
logistics of the agenda and the attendees and the guest speakers and all that.
So it's been
you
there.
must know from playing in this podcast, it's not always
also,
easy. It's not just like hopping on the phone and there's a lot of prep work that I'm sure goes into it post.
I have, and I still am running FISD events all around the world, and I know what it's like. Look, Robert, I knew this was going to happen. We're at 55 minutes and 56:03 minutes and seconds. I always ask my guests at this point, we run out of time, but were there a couple of things that you were burning to share with the world that have not been said, that need to be said? Robert, what final thoughts do you want to share with the audience?
Sure. So I think I tend to be very vocal, and I think I've shared most of my thoughts very candidly on the topics. What I would say to my fellow market data managers is fight the good fight. Never give up. The vendors can be ruthless. The vendors will kind of push harder and harder, and we just need to push back. And even though it may seem like a thankless job at times, or the results may not always be what you want, you have to fight the good fight, because if not, the vendors will pounce on that opportunity. And what we agree to today here, they'll try to get other people to agree to. So, I actually mentioned this at one of the substantive forums that we had. They're pushing for the statement of uses across like a lot of the index and ratings providers. And they come with like 100 questions, things that have no bearing on the commercials, right? And we pushed back and we answered about 10 questions only things that we thought were relevant to the current commercials. We didn't want to give them more ammunition to figure out ways to draw more revenue. But I'm sure there's people that answered all 100. And then they use that as pressure to say, well, most of your peers have provided this information, and so now you need to as well, right? So I think the more of us that fight the changes that they're trying to push, the more information they're trying to get out of us, the more we push back on that, the better opportunities we have of successfully avoiding certain things that we feel are unnecessary.
I'm a bit sad about that, because I totally feel where you're coming from on that. But in a sense, vendors and people selling stuff should be asking questions, intelligent questions, trying to understand their customer. That normally is a good thing, because then if you understand your customer well, you can go away and create products and services and price them at the right price point. So that should, in a normal circumstance, be a good thing. But somehow in our industry, the way you feel about it and others feel about it, that somehow, that vendors, exchanges, all these different players are asking all these questions is actually to your detriment. That that feels like a market that's slightly broken because it
Yeah,
should
because
be.
they peruse your websites, they look at your marketing materials, they'll take the questions you ask where they'll actually ask about clients, what your client, who are your clients, and they do that so they can then go explore those client websites and see if somehow data is getting downstream to clients. Well, not through you, maybe, but maybe there's a fund, there is a pension fund that has multiple asset managers and trying to figure out, well, how are they getting this data? Because they don't have a direct agreement with us, so someone must be sharing it
I know,
downstream.
and it's a sad theme to finish it, but there is a still this breakdown of trust. There's still a distrust on, and I know when I talk to a lot of the vendor firms and exchanges, there's also some distrust there as well. So it's yeah, there are some issues out there in the marketplace. You know, maybe a podcast like this, maybe what FISD is doing. You know, was it talk, not war? You know, somehow talk some of these things through. There's no magic answers. Look, Robert, it's been a pleasure. And we've raced through the hour. We're over the hour now. So I'm going to sadly draw this to a conclusion and say a massive thank you to you there in New York. Keep it cool in New York for the next 2 weeks when I come out.
Will do. And thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure. And wow, the hour went by so quickly. It's amazing once you get talking how
Exactly.
quickly it can go by.
There's lots
I wish you the best of luck with your endeavor on this podcast, right? I think it's a great forum for speaking, one-on-one about these topics and sort of getting our voices to a wider audience. So, I look forward to seeing the video.
Thank you. Don't hang up. But I'm going to stop.
Okay.
I'll say cheerio. Bye-bye.
Bye.